If you get these 3 things right, you'll be ready to roll. You'll stop overthinking your writing and you'll be able to call yourself a writer. So in this video, I'll take my 8 years of writing experience and I'm going to try and condense it into a 3-part framework that I would follow if I was starting a book from scratch today. So I call this framework the beginner writer framework, and there are 3 levels to this. Level 1 is that you've never written anything before. In this case, I dare you to write 3 things, whether it's a journal entry, a prayer, a poem, a letter to a friend, or even a daydream of what your perfect road trip would entail. The idea here is similar to going to an ice cream store and sampling flavors to see what you enjoy. Yep, by writing even something short, you'll get a taste for what you like and you'll see whether writing energizes you or drains you. Sometimes the idea of being a published author is more glamorous than the work it requires to get there. But that doesn't mean you have to be some kind of writing prodigy. Oh no, by writing you may pick up that your skill level isn't that great, but this can always be worked on. We all start somewhere, and even as your skill improves, I don't think I've ever met anyone who claims to have written a perfect first draft of anything. Anyway, the main goal with level 1 is to get going, because starting is the hardest part of anything new. Whether you're wanting to start running, learning a new language, or starting your first book, the likelihood of you being caught up in your head about all of this is probably holding you back from getting started. It's normal to have fears and doubts. I consider myself quite the overthinker and I'm pretty fearful at times. But I once heard Elizabeth Gilbert say something that resonated with me. She said she finds that she is 1% more curious than fearful. And I think if you approach writing something small with a mindset of being curious about what it feels like, then you don't have to focus on the fears or doubts of your abilities. But after you complete these 3 writing pieces and you've decided that you want to give your book a proper shot, then you have to answer this one question. Is writing a book a short-term or a long-term goal? There's no right answer here, by the way, but your answer will dictate how casually or seriously you'll be moving on from here. So if you're serious about writing your book in the not so distant future, then you'll have to decide how often you want to show up and write. I'm not saying that this is the only way to write a book. I mean, Elizabeth Gilbert is one of my favorite authors, and she only comes out with a new book every 4 or 5 years. So if you need time, take time. However, if you're in a space where you want to prioritize your book in the short term and you're prepared to commit to showing up consistently, then you're on your way to level 2. Now, level 2 is what I call finding your rhythm. Here, you decide to show up consistently over the space of 2 weeks. You can decide whether it's daily or how I do it, 5 days a week with weekends off, or you might even find that 3 times a week is your sweet spot. But the goal here is to identify how many days you can realistically commit to, as well as whether you prefer writing for time or for word count. You'll also get a sense as to whether you are a pantser or a plotter. If you're a pantser, you may realize that you like to use your dedicated writing time to get into your story. If you're a plotter, you may find yourself using that time to research, brainstorm, and outline what you want to work on. So the goal is to take 2 weeks to discover what approach to writing comes naturally to you, while at the same time noting how much time you can realistically allocate to showing up. Also, at this point, there is no pressure to know the genre of your book or what your book is even really about. All you're doing here is finding your rhythm. You could explore different story ideas every time you sit down. You could write part of chapters. You could even use the time to brainstorm your characters. It does not matter how you use the time. What matters is that you're getting a feel for showing up consistently, as well as what comes most naturally to you with regards to how you approach your writing. Again, you're more curious. You're not trying to overthink anything. Just to give you an example of what works for me, so I like to approach writing somewhat seasonally. So what I've recently done is I just picked a month and then decided that month was going to be the month that I would start my novel and get to the end of my first draft. But I would only work for 5 days of the week on my project and then have weekends off. And then in those 5 days, how I would structure my time, I like to work on a time basis, not so much a word count basis. So for 2 of the days, I would have 2-hour writing sessions. And then on the remaining 3 days, I would have 1-hour writing sessions. So it does mean that for 2 days, there is quite a big push when it comes to sitting down to write, because it's for quite a long time. I find that 2 hours can sometimes feel very quick, but at the same time, it can also feel very long. However, there's always those shorter days to look forward to, and I find that this has really worked for me. I sometimes like to go into this boot camp with a rough outline, and other times I need a detailed outline. But I like to have this done before I start my season of committed writing. However, when I'm not in the season where I am focusing on my project, I try to show up maybe 3 times a week, ranging anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, and then I'll just plot down random story ideas I have with regards to a story that I want to write, or perhaps something that's in development. So I'll just write down maybe scene ideas, set piece ideas. Sometimes it's literally just like a word or a sentence. So I don't put any pressure on myself during that time. But like I mentioned, what works for me is just dedicating a time to writing, not so much a word count, but I cannot tell you how many people I know that actually prefer writing to word count. So it really is fun to explore, to be curious, and to find out what would work best for you, as opposed to doing what other people are doing. If we go back to the ice cream analogy, this is where you figure out your go-to order. And hey, every now and then you may want to switch things up, but hopefully at this point you would have figured out what works for you most often. And for me, even though I've sampled a lot, I tend to go for the same 2 flavors, honeycomb and chocolate. So across these 2 levels, you've become familiar with the craft of what it takes to write something, and you're possibly learning a little bit about yourself. You may have encountered some of the fears that most people do, like self-doubt or judgment, but through journaling, you could ask these thoughts to step aside as you've been approaching this process with an attitude of play and curiosity to discover what works for you, which is a lot more inviting than forcing something that doesn't come naturally to you. If you're enjoying this video so far, it would be amazing if you could give it a thumbs up. It helps with the YouTube algorithm. Anyway, once you've gone beyond level 2, you have to make the ultimate choice. How badly do you want to write your first book? Pick on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being you'd like to write a book in your lifetime, and 10 being you'd like to have written your first draft in the next 3 months. You can't pick 5. If you're closer to 10, where you decide that it's going to be a top priority of yours to have completed your first draft sooner rather than later, then you are ready to move on to level 3. And level 3 is work smart. And here we need to understand the idea that we're trying to turn into a story, as well as how stories generally work. There's basically 3 things that you need to care about if you're trying to move from idea to finishing your first draft. And if you get these 3 things right, then you're ready to roll and your book is on its way to becoming a reality. And those 3 things are idea, structure, satisfaction. Firstly, the idea. There are 2 ways to go about getting an idea that I suggest if people don't know where to start. First, outline cinematic moments in your life that could make for a rich story. By doing this, you're tapping into what you know, and I find this to be the quickest way for me to put something together. But then you could also dream up your ultimate dream. For me, my big dream was always to go to Paris. And so I wrote a scene where I dreamed up the ultimate 24 hours in Paris, and I let my senses guide me. I thought of food that I wanted to eat, sights that I wanted to see, and obviously romance. And what is so amazing is that a couple of years after writing it, I got to live my perfect 24 hours in Paris, and it was everything I dreamed up and more. But that's just me. A friend of mine, her dream is a little bit different. She has always wanted to go on a road trip with her sister. So when it came to her trying to think of what to write, I just encouraged her to dream up the ultimate road trip with her sister. But this is just an idea of how to go about it. Please don't take my word as gospel. There are many ways to get ideas. So go with your gut and write whatever you want, whether it's historical fiction or you get the point. Next, it would be a great idea to introduce yourself to story structure. I have a few videos on my channel that give you a look inside various types of story structures. There are many options out there on what you could do. Again, go with what works for you. but deciding on some form of story structure may be what you need to hit the high and low notes that have been found in majority of successful stories over time. So you've got an idea, now you have a structure, and then you want to feel satisfied with your approach to writing your book. This may entail you spending time outlining each scene so that it fits in with the format. It could also mean you don't outline anything at all and dive straight into your writing. You also would have discovered whether you are a plotter or a pantser and which of the approaches brings you the most joy. But you also need to find satisfaction in how you want to approach this. Do you want to write alone, or do you want to be part of a writing community that all writes a book together? I know November is always a great time because a lot of people join the National Novel Writers Month, NaNoWriMo, or create their own version of it. But there are also other challenges that run throughout the year. And if you know of any good ones, drop them in the comments so that other people can check them out. But my encouragement is to outline how you could make this process the most enjoyable so that you want to turn up. So as you can see, it really boils down to how you go about structuring this process so that it's most enjoyable. Because if you enjoy it, then you'll consistently pitch up. So if you want to write a book, let me know in the comments. And if you're feeling really brave, I dare you to commit to an end date at which you hope to have completed your first draft. Let's encourage each other in the comments. And if you would like a sneak peek at what it took for me to finish a book, I will share my experience, including all of the ups and downs, because it's not always smooth sailing, no matter how enjoyable it is. I will leave a playlist of my experience for you in the end screen. So see you there. Take care. Bye-bye.